Today we're going to introduce trigonometry with the first ratio we're going to study, which is called the tangent ratio. The tangent ratio, which we abbreviate just tan, it says is equal to the ratio. What's a ratio again?
A proportion.
Part of a proportion. What is a ratio?
Comparing one thing to another.
Comparing one thing to another, and how do we usually write it?
Something and then
Something.
We could write it with a colon, or we could write it as a fraction. So a ratio is typically a fraction. So our tangent is going to be a fraction. It says it's equal to the ratio or the fraction of the length of the side opposite of an angle to the length of the side adjacent to an angle. For our beginning trig information, we will only be working with right triangles. It will be very important that we are only working on right triangles for now. Then what we're going to do is select one of the non-right angles in the triangle. We have to have a right triangle, but we're not actually going to work with the right angle itself. We're going to choose one of the other two angles to work with. Sometimes you'll be told which one, sometimes you'll get to make a choice. And we're going to label that angle. Sometimes we just label it with like the vertex name, so it could be labeled A. Sometimes we know how big it is, so we'll actually have a number there. Sometimes we label it with this symbol, which is the Greek letter theta. A little O with a line in it. We say is theta. And somehow we're going to choose an angle on which we're going to place our focus. Then once we have selected that angle, we want to label the three sides of the triangle according to their relationship with that angle. A hypotenuse is always across from a right angle. Okay, so that doesn't matter what angle we're looking at. The hypotenuse is across from the right angle always. The other sides of the triangle we're going to call our opposite, which is directly across from the angle on which we're placing our focus. And the adjacent, which is right next to the angle on which we're placing our focus. Adjacent actually means next to. Like my room is adjacent to Mrs. Mimi's room because it's right next to her room. Okay. So we choose our angle, and then from that we find our opposite, which is straight across the triangle, and our adjacent, which is right next to it. Technically there are two sides that are right next to it, but one of them is the hypotenuse. So that one's already a special thing. So it's the other side that's right next to it. That hit your question? Then we have tangent of theta is equal to opposite over adjacent, is what this definition says. There are kind of three parts to this. You're going to have your trig name, which today the only one we're going to know and work with is tangent. We'll learn more as we move through the unit. But today we're just talking about tangent, so you'll have your trig name. Then you're going to have an angle, which you might know, so there's a number in there, or it might be something you don't know, so there would be a variable in there, like theta, or A, or X, or some kind of letter there. Okay? So we have our trig name, we have our angle, and then we have our fraction.
So that letter thing could just be an X.
It could just be an X. Yep, it's just another variable. So in our first example, it asks us to find tangent x and tangent y. So x is an angle and y is an angle. This is two separate problems within the same one here. So first, if it tells us to find tangent x, it told us which angle we need to place our focus on. So I'm going to find angle x, and that's where I'm focusing. I want to label then everything according to its relationship with x. So I've got my right angle down here. Which side is opposite of x?
5.
The 5. And which side is adjacent to x?
12.
The 12. So we said then that tangent, so we say tangent x, you give your trig name, you give your angle, is equal to opposite over adjacent. If you can reduce, you should, but this doesn't. Okay?
So tan X is just 5 over 12.
So tangent of x is 5 over 12.
That's it.
That's it for that one.
Wow.
Tangent of y tells us that we're going to place our focus on y. So according to y then, what side is the opposite? 12. And what side is the adjacent? 5. So then the tangent of y is 12 over 5.
Is it better to leave it improper or is it mixed?
Leave it improper. Yep, we want to leave it as a single ratio, so we don't want to divide that out and either get a decimal or an improper. We want to leave it as a single ratio, reduce if possible, but otherwise just leave it as a single fraction. This problem really only asks us to find those ratios, and if that's what our direction said, we would be done with this. But the majority of your problems are actually going to ask you to go further and actually solve for something in the triangle. So let's say that we wanted to actually solve for angle y. We want to know how big is that angle. We can do that with trigonometry. On your calculators, and this is going to be a little bit clunky because you all have different calculators. So just be patient, work through. We'll need to figure out and make sure that everybody has their calculator working the right way. You can use a graphing calculator for these problems. You can use like what we call a scientific calculator, which is kind of like the medium-sized calculator. Or you can actually use like an iPhone calculator, iPod calculator as well. If you turn it sideways, then you get your tangent button. Okay. You have to, if you have your screen lock on, you have to turn it so you can actually turn it sideways. But if you turn it sideways, you'll actually get your tangent button and you can do it there. Now, if you have a graphing calculator or a scientific calculator, kind of a medium-sized calculator, you're going to be able to plug this in directly straight across. If you have an iProduct calculator, you actually have to type it in kind of backwards, and I'll show you both of those ways, and then we'll want to make sure everybody's getting the right answer, because it doesn't matter whether you can watch me get the right answer on my calculator, you have to know how to do it on your calculator so that you can do it when you get home. To solve for an angle, we will need to do what is called an inverse tangent, which has a little -1 there. On the calculator, it is second tangent. Okay, so calculators have a second button. It is typically in the upper left-hand corner, or some calculators call it a shift button. But we'll need to press our second button when we're solving for an angle. If you have a calculator that is either a graphing calculator or a scientific calculator where you'll be able to type this straight directly in, what you're going to type in is second tangent. The tangent button's kind of in the middle of all the buttons. Second tangent, and that will bring up that tangent with a little -1 on it that we call the inverse tangent. And then you'll type in 12 divided by 5 and then enter. And it will give you an answer.
1.1.
That answer should be, I think, 67. If you get 1 point something something, that means the mode on your calculator is wrong, and we'll change that now, and then you won't have to go mess with it again. So if you did not get 67, but you got 1 point something something, what you need to do is find your mode button, which is right at the top of your calculator. On about the 3rd or 4th line down, there are 2 options that say radian and degree. The word degree needs to be the one that is dark. So use your arrows to go down and get on top of the word degree and press enter to make it dark.
Degree instead of radians.
Degrees instead of radians. So if you got 1 point something something instead of 67, go into mode, change it so the word degree is dark, and then if you reevaluate it, you should get the correct answer now.
Got it.
What do you do when you're done?
Hit enter. If you are working on an iProduct calculator, you will need to type this in backwards. What you are going to do is type in our fraction first, 12 divided by 5, and hit enter. And then second tangent, enter.
Ooh.
So if you are working on an I product, that is what you will need to do to evaluate this. Type in
I got it.
fraction, hit enter, second tangent, enter.
Does it come out equally?
Hey.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's rounded, it rounds. Yeah. It's like 67.3 something, we need to read. You're in the wrong mode. So you just go down to green and make that dark. And then press second.
I wonder how I get on this.
Get out there.
I got it twice.
Alright, has everybody been able to successfully get the right answer on your calculator?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. To practice more, let's try it doing the X one. So find the answer for X in whichever way your calculator needs it to be. So if you have a calculator that is a scientific or graphing and you can type it straight in, type in second tangent 5/12. If you have an I product, do your fraction first, hit enter, and then the second tangent, and hit enter. So go ahead and calculate how big angle X will be.
So it's 23.
We should get approximately 23 degrees. For angles, I round to the closest whole number. Rounding up at 0.5 and above, rounding down at 0.4 and below. Round to the closest degree for an angle.
So that's what the angle X.
So that's how big the angle X is.
Should be.
We will do more examples, but are there questions on this one before we go on to the next one? Angle X should be approximately 23 degrees. 22 point something, that rounds up. For our next problem, we're asked to find the value of a side of a triangle. So we know the right angle, and we know one more angle. We know one side, and we want to know another side. According to the angle that we know, which side is the opposite?
Why?
And which side is the adjacent?
32.
So when we set up our tangent equation, we say tangent of the angle, which we actually know is 56, is equal to the opposite, which is y, over the adjacent, which is 32. Okay, it's always tangent, angle, equals opposite over adjacent. Sometimes we know the angle, sometimes we don't. So this time we actually have a value there and we can plug that in for the angle instead of plugging in a letter. We are trying to solve this for y. What is being done to y right now? It's being divided by 32. How do I undo dividing by 32? Multiply by 32. We write that 32 in front of the tangent, not right next to 56, because that 32 is multiplied by the tangent. It's not multiplied by the 56. Now, we can evaluate this on our calculator. When you are solving for a side, you will not use the second. Okay? When solving for an angle, we need the second, that little tangent -1. When solving for a side, you will not use the second. So if you are using a scientific type calculator, you can type it in exactly as it is. 32, tangent, 56, enter. If you are using an I product, you're going to type in 56, tangent, enter, times 32, enter. You have to type it in backwards if you're using an I product. And for my sides, I typically round to 1 decimal place, so I would say this is 47.4. For angles, I go to the closest whole number. For sides, I go to 1 decimal place. It's just kind of my MO, just the way I do things. It's not that like that's the right way to do it. It's just kind of how I do it.
Is it okay if we just round to a whole number?
Yeah. Okay, so is everybody able to get the answer typing it into your calculator the way your calculator needs it?
Yeah.
Okay, so for an angle, you will press second. For a side, you do not. You just use the plane tangent. Okay, so let's do some more examples. I want to solve for x in this one. X is an angle. So I'm going to set up my ratio. First, we need to label the sides according to the relationship with our angle. So according to x, where's the opposite?
12.
12. Where's the adjacent? So we're going to say tangent x, tangent angle, equals opposite 12 over adjacent 15.
Yeah.
Because we're solving for an angle on this one, you will need to do a second. So type this one into your calculator in the appropriate way.
Should we simplify first, or what?
It doesn't matter. You don't have to simplify it first.
39.
39.
And we get x is approximately 39. It's about 38.6.7, and we're going to round that up anyway. So about 39 degrees.
Would it be the same if you simplified?
It would. If you simplified correctly, it wouldn't matter, yeah. But it's just an extra step.
Using your primary calculator. Do you have it?
In my locker somewhere.
That's just
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah. There is exactly.
I can get one on this one.
In this one, I want to solve for a side. Focusing on the 35, where is the opposite? X. And 7 then would be the adjacent. So I'm going to set up tangent of angle, which I know is 35, equals opposite x over adjacent 7. We need to get x alone by doing what? Multiplying by 7. And 7 tangent 35 is what you want to evaluate. So type that into your calculator in the appropriate way. Remember, for a side, you do not use the second. This is a plane tangent. And I get this about 4.9, or you could round that up to 5.
Why do you put the 7 over there? Because you have to do it both sides.
Yes, you have to multiply both sides by 7 to get the x alone.
Is it 25? 4.9?
In this one, we're almost given kind of too much information because we're told where both of the what both of the angles are. Even if you're not told what both of the angles are, you could still find it because they add up to 180 in a triangle. So like on the last one, I could have found out that the other one was 55. Right? So if you know one of the angles, then you can find out the other one by subtracting out. So when you have kind of too much information in this sense, you have to select which angle you want to place your focus on. It will be easiest for you to place your focus on the angle that is opposite of what you are trying to solve for. That will set up an easier equation to solve. It's not wrong to do it the other way, but it is harder to do it the other way. So for this problem, if I want to select the angle that is opposite of what I'm trying to solve for, what angle would I want to use? The 50. Okay, so I'm going to use the 50 in this one. It could be done with a 40, but it's a more difficult process. So I'm going to solve this problem then as tangent of 50 is equal to opposite x over adjacent 3. multiply both sides by 3 to get the x alone. And 3 tangent 50 is what you want to evaluate.
3.6.
And we get about 3.6. So on most of your homework problems, you will have this situation where they give you actually all of the angles and you need to make a selection. I would select always, if you're given a choice, the angle that is opposite of what you're trying to solve for. And even if it was like the blue problem, and you were only given one angle, I would still want to use the angle that's opposite of what I'm trying to solve for. And if I don't know what that angle is, I would just subtract out from 180 and find it. Because that will be easier than trying to select the other angle. Okay? So always select the angle that's opposite of what you're trying to solve for. If you don't know what that angle is, just subtract out from 180 to find it. Okay? One more thing that will happen on some of your homework problems. Something like this. On this one I have to use angle x because that's what I want to solve for. So according to angle x, what is the opposite?
Blank.
It's blank. And we have to know it. 3 is the adjacent, but we're given the hypotenuse and we can't use the hypotenuse for tangent. We need to use opposite and adjacent. So how do I find a missing side of a right triangle? This was something that was on your test yesterday. Yeah. Pythagorean theorem. 5 squared plus 3 squared or equals 3 squared plus that opposite side squared. Okay? You have to know your opposite and adjacent if you're solving for an angle. Knowing the hypotenuse won't work for a tangent. So you will need to use your Pythagorean theorem to solve for that missing side. 25 equals 9 plus opposite squared. 16 is opposite squared, so that side is 4. And now you could solve this problem with a tangent. Okay, and I would do tangent of x is equal to 4 over 3. And since on this one we're solving for an angle, this is where we would need a second tangent. And I get approximately 53 degrees. Okay. Questions? All right, your homework is from section 8.5.